Hello and welcome to my channel. Welcome back to my channel. My name is McKenna and today we're going to be doing a nice cute little series review. This series is the Bromance Book Club series by Alyssa K. Adams, or at least the three that are currently out. This includes the Bromance Book Club, the first book in the series, Undercover Bromance, which is the second book in the series, and Crazy Stupid Bromance, which is the third book in the series. And the fourth book in the series, Isn't It Romantic, is coming out this July. Side note, I got this Fable Bands phone knot today in the mail, and I absolutely love it. It's so cute and it's inspired by the Bromance Book Club. The fun thing about this series is that they're all kind of intertwined, every book is. The basis of this series is that there's a book club of a bunch of Nashville high-profile men that get together and read romance novels, which they call manuals. It's a really fun dynamic between all of them, and I really like the way that Alyssa K. Adams writes them and how they're kind of breaking down toxic masculinity from being men themselves, and it's just a world of a lot of interesting and lovable characters. As I said, the first book is the Bromance Book Club by Alyssa K. Adams, obviously, but this book follows Gavin Scott and his wife Thea Scott. They have been married for a couple years now, and they had to get a shotgun wedding a couple years ago because Thea found out that she was pregnant. And in these years, it comes to a large crescendo when, after an amazing night for his career, Gavin finds out that his wife has been faking it their entire marriage, and he has a bad reaction to it, ends up moving out, and when she files for divorce, that's when he wants to get her back. So he gets enlisted in the Bromance Book Club to get her back, and they read Courting the Countess to kind of help him figure out what to do and how to get her back. The one thing I really want to note about this book in particular that might have people being like, oh yeah, I definitely want to read that then, is that this dynamic, this relationship really reminds me of Jim and Pam season 9. Like, it does. And I will say, upon reading it, I had like I don't know if this is necessarily conducive to what it's trying to say. It feels just, there are parts that feel just a little manipulative on Gavin's part. But they kind of like break it down. I'm not gonna sit here and be like, it's completely fine, none of it was manipulative at all, because there definitely were some parts that some cards he had to play in order to get her to allow him to kind of be around in that. And you know, it was a hard read, despite it being like a romance book. These books do not shy away from hard topics. It's not like a fun little only romance, especially because this one deals with divorce. It deals with issues from parental figures and how that can affect you in your own relationships, which I think is a super important thing to have been included. Because I know it's something that's like talked about, but I've never really seen it in a book before, other than that I don't want to be like my father thing, where they actively are like a certain way in relationships because of how they were raised, which was something really interesting to see, and that does kind of carry over into Undercover Bromance, but I'll get there in a second. This also deals with the fact that Thea kind of feels a little insecure in their relationships, as it's entirely been about Gavin the entire years of his marriage, as he is a professional baseball player and she's the wife, and there's like a lot of different roles to play as the wife. And there's like an entire club to just be a wife or girlfriend or fiance of a baseball player. And there's changes that she wants to make to it, and she doesn't just want to be passive in her own life anymore and only active in Gavin's life. She kind of wants to bridge that, which I think is a really important thing to include as well. When I first read this, I only gave it 4 stars, but looking back on it, I think I'm gonna give it 5 stars, like bump it up. I think I already did on Goodreads, but I absolutely loved it. It actually was one of my, it was my honorable mention for my like top 10 of 2020. I just loved it so much. And then we move on to the second book, which is Undercover Bromance by Lizzie Adams. This follows Liv, who is Thea's sister. So the wife from the first book, her sister is in this book, and the guy is Braden Mack. The guy is Braden Mack, and he doesn't have a particular like relationship to Gavin, so they're not really connected. They're just kind of both in the Bromance Book Club, but they do kind of have a little bit of like a rivalry thing. It's really fun to read though. But this book follows Liv, who wants to be a chef, and she is a sous chef for a very high profile famous chef in Nashville. I feel like I said chef so many times then. But behind the scenes, the celebrity chef that is so beloved is actually just a huge dick and treats everyone that works there poorly. But she didn't even imagine the worst of it. One night when she gets in trouble, she goes up to her boss's office to be yelled at, and she walks in on him sexually harassing one of the younger employees. She gets fired in this exchange and goes on a mission to kind of like have him have his downfall, make sure this is well known. But as he is a high profile celebrity in the scene, she gets blackballed from all restaurants in Nashville. This means turning to Braden Mack, who she doesn't really like, but he owns a lot of nightclubs in the Nashville scene, and he's a very prominent figure. And if anyone's gonna help her bring down, the guy's name is, what's his name? The chef's name is Royce Preston. But she wants to expose him, and the only way to do this is to go through Braden Mack, which is kind of like a hate to love thing. I never really got the direct hate. It's kind of like a witty banter to love, but she notices that they kind of have a connection going, and she has her outlook on love because of her parents, like her sister did in book 1, and so she doesn't really want to go through with it. She's like, I don't need a man right now. But do attempts fail? This book was great because Mac himself is very charming and also has like demons in the closet. I guess it's skeletons in the closet and like inner demons, but like it's fine. He also has inner demons that are quite interesting. I enjoyed that part of it. He is definitely a romantic at heart, so it was nice to see that kind of dynamic flipped on its head, where the woman is kind of a little more steely and hard and has a more negative outlook on love, and the guy is really romantic and wants to fall in love and have like his forever person. And of course, I want to mention that there's a huge like trigger warning in here for sexual assault. There's a lot of talk about it and like going through the situation of bringing him down. It's just talked about a lot. So if that's something that would be triggering to you, you know that going in, or maybe just don't if it would be too triggering to you, but just as a note. And the final book in the series out so far is Crazy Stupid Bromance, again by Lizzie Adams. This follows Alexis Carlisle, who is best friends to Liv from book 2, and Noah Logan, who is best friends to best friends to Braden Mack, pretty good friends to Braden Mack, again in book 2. So the beginning of the synopsis for this book kind of spoils the previous book, but not in like a huge way, like in a small way. It's supposed to be like a small plot twist. So if you really don't want to be spoiled for that, I'll put like a timestamp up on the screen to like skip to if you really don't want to hear that part that's gonna spoil it. But it does deal with sexual harassment. So if that's something that you like want to know going into, I'm gonna talk about it. Just if you want me to skip it, or if you don't want to hear it, I will like timestamp so you're not like spoiled for it, but I don't think it's something that should necessarily be like a spoiler. It doesn't really spoil the outcome, and it could be sensitive to some people. So I wanted to say something about it, but again, I understand like not wanting to be spoiled for something at all. But this is that Alexis Carlisle is one of Royce's victims from the previous book. She had previously worked at the restaurant and had been sexually harassed and actually had sexual relations with Royce Preston to get money to help her mother, her expenses paid off because she had cancer and was had to have a funeral, cover those kinds of costs, as well as open her dream, which was a cat cafe, which she did end up getting to do. In a lot of the previous book it's talked about as well. The previous 2 books, I think it's kind of mentioned, but a lot of it is heavy in this, obviously because Alexis is one of the main characters. Because of this and Alexis's like cafe, she holds a lot of events helping survivors of sexual harassment, and it's a really empowering thing. It's really wonderful to see that type of thing and that type of growth, where while the sexual harassment and the lingering emotions isn't really something that are deeply talked about in this book, you can see some of the residual effects throughout the novel. But it was in the heat of all this going down with Royce Preston that Noah and Alexis met, and so Noah didn't want to overstep and try to get a romance going with her while she was going through this, and that led to a 1.5 years of them just being friends. Even though they clearly both have feelings for each other, they don't want to say it and spoil the friendship. But someone comes knocking on Alexis's cat cafe door and says that they are sisters and that her father needs a kidney, and from there she kind of has to make the decision of if that's something she wants to go through with, especially because her father's not someone she ever knew in her life. So again, the Bromance Book Club is enlisted in trying to get these 2 together, but then they start to kind of form a better relationship, and it kind of slow burns into it, and you know, they have things in common as far as they had each lost a parent, which is another potential trigger warning on top of sexual harassment. Losing a parent, one is through cancer and the other one is through war, so be aware of that as well if that's something that could potentially be triggering to you. One of the things that I did really like about this book is in the 2 previous books, they're both really like feisty main characters. I mean, they're sisters and they both have the kind of like grump kind of thing, and like with a soft main male character, which isn't necessarily something I dislike. It's actually something I really like. Like Gavin Scott in the first book, I loved him, absolutely loved him. Mac was a little more like not necessarily soft, he was just romantic in like the classic kind of playboy but wants a relationship kind of way, I feel like. But in this book, the main female character is very compassionate and kind and kind of passive in the way that she does things, which I thought was very interesting. Not necessarily in like a docile lets people kind of, well, I shouldn't say not lets people roll over her. There's always like that point where she's like, you know, people can't take advantage of me anymore, but she's not like the I'm gonna sit back and let the men do all the talking. So I liked that like striking balance, because I feel like the feisty female character is a huge thing right now, and it's great. I love it. I love seeing it. But it's nice to get like the other side of that, where they're like nice and kind and would do anything to help anyone, and like doesn't necessarily know how to be mean, wants to be nice and professional all the time. Not that the other characters are mean by any means, but you know what I mean? Like there's not a lot of fights in this. It's like, I mean, there are some fights in this, but it's not like completely warring between the 2. I mean, it is friends to lovers. There's not like fights instigated for no reason. There's not things. She just has an entirely different personality than the first to characters, which I obviously don't think is wrong. I love each and every character in this book in their own right, in every book in this series in their own right, but I just liked that the differences were included. And actually, the main character of the book that's coming out in July is my favorite character, so I'm super excited. It is the Russian Vlad. He plays hockey, and he had a marriage of convenience with his childhood best friend, so I'm excited to see how that one plays out. Just a couple more things. One of my favorite parts in this book, the third book, was when they got really meta. So they're talking, they're having their book club, and it says, Malcolm got that teacher about to drop some wisdom look about him. How do you think this book ends, Noah? It's a romance. I would assume they end up together and live happily ever after. Malcolm nodded. Exactly. All romances end that way. Even though readers know the minute they pick up romances how they're going to end, they still read them loyally. Why do you suppose that is? The sex? Colton slapped the table again. No, wrong answer. It's the journey, Malcolm said. It's how they get to that happily ever after that matters and makes these books so special and instructive. The journey, Noah repeated. There is no more universal story than of two people working through their shit to overcome huge obstacles and find their way to happiness, Malcolm said. But every journey is different, every obstacle is unique, and it's in that unique journey that we find lessons for our own lives. Can't you just give me a cheat sheet? He was only half joking. Not if you want this to really work, Max said somberly. Just keep reading, Malcolm said. Your journey starts now. I did really like that because obviously, like most romance books, they get together in the end. Like, that's the point. So it was interesting to see that kind of perspective and like really meta situation in which they were talking about it as romance readers in a romance book. And like the last thing that's just a note that I find super interesting for at least these first three books. Every male character, like the main male characters of these three books, have first and last names. Like Gavin Scott, Braden Mack, Noah Logan. And I don't know why I like picked up on that. Why that was the thing that I was like, but it was. And I find it interesting. Whenever someone has a name that's like first name and the last name is also a first name. But yeah, that was just a minor observance. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know down in the comments below if you have read any of the Bromance Book Club, or now if you plan to. And as always, make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you sometime for a new one. Bye!